And good day, I am the Gadfly, Daddy Tadell from the grassroots, where Malcolm X and Dr. King were wrong. As great men as both were, their optimism and their enthusiasm and their willingness to literally put their lives on the line for human dignity, truth, justice, and equality for all, they went wrong. And where did they go wrong? They trusted in the innate common cause and the supposed innate good of men. And I'll put it this way, Malcolm X felt that there should have been a coalition with blacks in America, with people all over the world that had been oppressed by the colonial powers, and that all the oppressed would see a common thread of, say, brotherhood, and blacks who were oppressed, and brown people who were oppressed, and yellow people who were oppressed would come together and rise up and overthrow the colonial power or white supremacy powers that overtook them. But it didn't happen. And basically, Dr. King, at the time of his death, or leading to his death between 1966 and 1968, would come to the same conclusion, which is they both wanted to overthrow the empires that control everyone. But they really underestimated the police power and the propaganda power of the media organizations that those rulers of those nations have. When Malcolm X toured overseas for about 8 months, almost a year, he was trying to get those newly freed African states and leaders to have a common unity with the civil rights movement in America, and they didn't really budge toward that. They gave him mouth support, but not financial and monetary support. Now, this is well documented by the CIA, who followed Malcolm throughout Africa and also poisoned him in an attempt to get rid of him in Africa. Dr. King admitted, both Malcolm and Dr. King, prior to their assassinations, admitted that they both may have been overly optimistic that the poor across all racial lines could come together and as one, as a coalition. Both Malcolm and Dr. King dream of what we now call a rainbow coalition. And those coalitions were to be made of blacks, browns, yellow people, Asians. And I don't mean no disrespect by any of this. This is the pervasive thought. Didn't happen. Because, see, the social and cultural differences come into play. Because human beings, as a whole, we have the old brain, the reptilian brain in us. That's the oldest brain in the human head, the oldest part of the brain. And that brain is about self-preservation and survival. And all of us are ethnocentric. We want what looks like us to come first. And we can't help that because that is a part of our evolutionary development. And so in that, we have developed cultures and ideals and mores and belief unique to each of our individual social, political, and racial cultures. Now, what does this have to do? Look at it today. Right now, we're seeing in real time in 2026. Now, as a community, black people well understand that ICE and Donald Trump is going to eventually come for the black community. But yet, because of decades of differences with the Hispanic community, we're not looking to join them at this time because we're like, hey, look, we told you Donald Trump. And Donald Trump showed you during his first administration. But to keep this in line, I'm sure it's using as an example to show you how even though you can have a common enemy, you can still at the same time have social, political, and cultural differences that prevent unity. And until, as a whole, the oppressed, and Malcolm was there, and King was there at their time, but they miscalculated how deep the division and differences were across cultural lines, even though they suffered under the same enemy. Look at this. Poor whites are in just as much poverty as poor blacks and poor Hispanics, right? But because of social and cultural differences, we can't get it together. Poor whites are going to vote how? Primarily Republican. And poor blacks are going to vote how? Primarily Democratic. Because until the oppressed across social and political lines and even racial lines realize oppressed is oppressed, that's the only way that 1% will be truly overthrown. And in that, Dr. King and Malcolm X were essentially right, but their optimism is what went wrong. We got to be really honest with ourselves that the cultural and societal differences separates us. The oppression should, it should, if we could get rid of our self-preservation along racial lines, should unify us against the true common enemy that oppresses us all. And Dr. King put it this way: I am never all I ought to be unless you are all you ought to be. And you are never all you ought to be unless I'm all I ought to be. And we'll never be all in all until God is all within each of us, until we see the value of all of ourselves, helping ourselves to what is rightfully belong to all on the earth and not just a few. 8 people have more money than 4 billion, half of all the people on this planet. That's a problem. But it could be overcome in a day if we overcame our own intergroup and outer group, I'm using that word, prejudice and desires, and really live up to the creed that all men are created equal and nothing less is ever acceptable. Stay woke.